everyone, welcome to another episode of Sporty History. Today we're going to be talking about a university's role in three of North America's most popular sports. McGill University was established in 1821 in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and the school is known for its very high academic standards and really incredible programs, but also its influence on North America's top three most popular sports, including basketball, Canadian football, which by extension means American football, and ice hockey. So let's get started. The first sport we're going to start off with is basketball. Now, the creation of one of America's biggest and most favorite sports was actually thanks to a Canadian by the name of James Naismith. Now, Naismith was born in Ontario, Canada, and later invented the sport of basketball while working at a Massachusetts YMCA. Interestingly enough, Naismith is actually a graduate of McGill University. He graduated from the university in 1891 with a degree in physical education. While studying at McGill, Naismith was a really big athlete, where he competed in sports like lacrosse, rugby, football, gymnastics, and soccer. He was also a very talented athlete, as he won numerous awards from the university, particularly in gymnastics. After he graduated from McGill University, he was actually hired by the university to teach physical education and also became McGill's first ever director of athletics. As part of his job, he was the director for physical education and training for those who were taking the physical education program, but also for creating training for the different athletes who were playing at the university. Shortly after working for McGill, he later moved to Massachusetts, where he started working for the YMCA. Even though there's not a direct link to McGill for the creation of basketball, there are still some very important things that McGill did for basketball, particularly in Canada. Now, on February 6, 1904, the first ever intercollegiate, as in university and college, basketball game was held at McGill University. McGill faced off against Queen's University, which was based in Kingston, in a little tournament, thus starting a tradition of intercollegiate basketball in Canada. This year, actually, on February 6, 2019, they celebrated the 115th anniversary of the first ever men's collegiate basketball game in Canada. The university was also part of some of the first women's basketball games in Canada. On October 5th, 1919, McGill faced off against Queen's University once again. 100th anniversary of this event was also celebrated this year in October 2019. Now, due to both these teams kind of playing one another in both men's and women's basketball, the universities have developed a little bit of a rivalry. However, now that they're both in different provinces, they don't get to play one another that often, but do come together every couple of years to play a game, and a little bit of their rivalry dating back almost 100 years now. The next sport McGill University had a hand in creating was actually American/Canadian football. Now, I believe the university is very important in establishing both different versions of this football. If you don't know, the NFL, which is the American National Football League, and the CFL, which is the Canadian Football League, are slightly different versions of a very similar sport. Now, in the very early years of the game, both Canadian and American football had slightly different versions of what was called rugby football. Now, the game was brought over primarily by Irish and British immigrants that came to Canada and America, and was based on the game of rugby, or something that was also called folk football. Now, the first football matches were much more like a rugby match that you would see today, before there were some other rules established to the versions of football that made them a separate sport. Now, the first ever official football game was played in Massachusetts between Harvard and McGill University. Their idea was to have one game where you played based on the American rules and another game based on the McGill/Canadian rules. Now, this game began on May 18th, 1874. Now, other versions of the first ever football game have been played in different places. However, this specific game between McGill and Harvard is probably the most influential in the creation of the different types of football, Canadian and American. Now, the first game that they did was the American style, which was much more rugby focused, as in there was a lot more just tackling and hitting each other and escaping with the ball once you had an opportunity to. The second game they played was based on the Canadian/McGill rules and introduced key aspects to the sport, both for Canadian and American football, including running with the ball, tackling, forward passing, downs, kicking the ball for extra points after touchdowns, and of course, touchdowns as well. And also, more specific to the McGill style of game was actually the type of ball. Now, the American game had a round ball like a soccer ball, whereas the McGill ball had a rugby ball, so it was a little bit more oblong shaped and was easier for throwing and catching. Harvard University liked a lot of these new rules, and later when they went to play Yale University at a game a year later, they introduced some of the aspects from the McGill/Canadian version of football. These new rules eventually made their way into American football that is today played in the NFL. The Canadian game went a slightly different direction than the American game, but many of the rules stem from the Canadian version of the game played at McGill University. The creation of the sport, the Canadian classic ice hockey, is probably the one where McGill University has been most involved. Now, there are many places that claim to be the birthplace of hockey, such as Kingston, Halifax, Dartmouth, and Windsor. Now, each city had their own slightly different version of the first ever hockey game. However, Montreal had the real first hockey game ever. Between 1873 and 1886, McGill students and alumni helped create the official rules for the first ever game of ice hockey. Now, particularly McGill engineering graduate James Creighton is considered kind of the primary organizer of creating these rules and of the first game that they actually played. The first organized ice hockey game was held on March 3rd, 1875 at the Victoria Ice Rink in Montreal, Quebec. A team from McGill, again with students and alumni, faced off against another team. Most of the players went on to found the McGill Hockey Club, which was the world's first ever ice hockey team. Later in 1877, McGill organized the first ever ice hockey team, along with publishing the official rules for ice hockey in the Montreal Gazette. And also, more specifically to other aspects of ice hockey, many McGill graduates helped create the first ever puck, the first ever artificial ice hockey rink, the first ever layout for the ice hockey rinks, including the different colored lines, also jerseys, penalty shots, and a lot more of the technical rules. Many of the men involved with creating these things are currently in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Then in 1886, the school and its alumni were critical in creating the Amateur Hockey Association of Canada, which helped establish the future National Ice Hockey League. Now, the first World Championship for ice hockey was held at the Montreal Winter Carnival in 1883, where the McGill hockey team won. They continued this tradition into 1888, where Lord Stanley of Preston attended with his family, where he watched the McGill team win that year as well. He enjoyed the tournament so much that he later went on to create the Dominion Hockey Challenge Cup, which is now known as the Stanley Cup and is awarded to the winner of the National Hockey League every year. And that is how McGill University has helped create North America's pretty much top 3 most popular sports. Now, McGill hasn't just helped with those sports. McGill alumni, or people who have been studied at McGill, have competed at every single Olympic Games since 1908. And many other alumni have gone on to become professional athletes. They've gone into coaching, working in the sporting world, showing that the school's importance to sport doesn't just extend to helping create 3 sports, but also extends currently creating some of Canada's best athletes. Thank you for sticking around and watching this short little video on McGill and sport history. If you liked it, you can always give it a thumbs up. If you want to see these videos a bit more regularly, you can subscribe as well. And if there's some other sport history event you'd like me to cover, you can send me a message or leave me a comment. Thanks, bye.